Okay. The long-term causes of World War I. The Ottoman Empire, along with many other countries, refused to modernize. This was a partial cause to World War I because these countries began to feel threatened by countries with modern technology, and the points of view of different countries clashed in terms of technology and progression. The different progressions of religion caused conflict as well. Many countries were using new forms of government, while others still used absolute monarchies. These clashes resulted in widespread conflict. Also, the differences in military powers caused a good amount of mistrust and tension between many countries. Another long-term cause were alliances. Alliances were also a source of tension and mistrust between the European countries that may have sparked World War I, because Triple Alliance, which was between Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy, became central power alliances and left the interests of Italy out of the picture. Many of the alliances caused conflict, as the countries who were left out or who were discriminated against in the alliances would often feel anger and resentment towards the countries who formed said alliance. Alliances are also what caused this war to be a world war, because many countries were dragged into the fighting because they were forced to support their allies and partake in the war. One thing that has always been present in the ignition of wars is nationalism. Germany portrayed nationalism through the pride of military forces. France felt very resentful against Germany because of the threat of its army. The Pan-Slavic movement also caused conflict throughout Europe, and this movement was mainly backed by nationalism. This caused even more distrust between the countries to form. A large portion of the causes of World War I was competition. Before, competition was a progressive driving factor, but in this case it became a competition for power instead of human progression. There was a huge competition for power when the age of imperialism rose. Almost all of the European powers were scrambling to colonize in Africa. And the conflict this caused, along with the alliances it created, is one of the biggest factors in the cause of World War I. Colonies were a display of power by European countries who created them, and the rising in power made many countries feel on edge and likely resented countries with more colonies. All this information was taken from the notes and readings given to us by the class of this church. The decisions that were made in the Versailles Treaty. In the Versailles Treaty, the terms created by the Big Three were very strict on Germany. The Big Three and Italy were mainly against Germany and blamed Germany for the war, making this treaty very biased and unbalanced. One of the first things that were restricted from Germany was many of its territories. These territories included Alsace-Lorraine, which was given to France, Northern Schleswig, which was given to Denmark, West Prussia, which was taken to Czechoslovakia, that's right, and a few other different territories. It can be assumed that the Big Three took these territories away from Germany to lower Germany's power and influence throughout Europe. Along with these territories, the Big Three took away Germany's overseas colonies. Colonization was a large show of power in Europe at this time, and taking these countries away from Germany was an obvious attempt to lower its power. After restricting the territories that Germany could keep, harsh limitations were put on the German military. Germany's army was forcibly reduced to 1,000 men, and there was no allowance of an air force, and only 6 naval ships were allowed, and the west of Rhineland was forbidden to Germans and was occupied by Allies. As it is common in this treaty, Germany's power was being harshly restricted, and in enforcing these terms, Germany was portrayed as much less of a threat to the general public, which would increase the Big Three's popularity with their countries. Though these restrictions made a majority of the European public feel safer, this left Germany feeling betrayed and resentful. Some of the general terms involved in the Versailles Treaty included Germany taking the blame for war, and as such, Germany had to pay billions of dollars of reparations to mainly France and Belgium. This made Germany's war debt much worse and left the infrastructure and economy unstable. All of the Big Three and Italy had countries rooting for revenge against Germany, and being the representative, they had to oblige. David Lloyd of Great Britain felt that communism in Russia was a bigger issue than the events in Germany, and as such felt that Germany should be left with enough resistance to defend against communism. But showing this opinion would make him an enemy in the public eye, and he was forced to agree on the tight balance placed on Germany to keep his position. France was heavily damaged by Germany in World War I, and George Clemenceau of France, one of the Big Three, wanted revenge just as much as the citizens did, as his wish was to bring Germany on its knees and leave it unable to cause of damage to the rest of Europe ever again. Woodrow Wilson of America, though he wanted to make sure that Germany's power was kept in check, he was more concerned on the isolation of America and wanted to separate from Europe. But he agreed to the tight restrictions to Germany nevertheless. Vittorio Orlando of Italy is lesser known of the Big Three, and because Italy betrayed the alliance it held with Germany in the war and the devastation to a large amount of property caused by Germany, he wanted Germany's power to be restricted to cause as less of a threat to Italy. Italy had a very small impact on the war, causing it to be a minority in the writing of the Versailles Treaty. When it came to the Big Three, the representatives were either unconcerned with Germany or wanted its downfall, causing the terms of the Versailles Treaty to be very harsh and somewhat unjust. Along with the injustice dedicated to Germany, Germany also had no say in the terms of the treaty, causing a large amount of anger to be directed to the Big Three from Germany. All of this information was taken from the notes in Mrs. Birch's class. The failure of the Versailles Treaty to recognize long-term causes. World War I caused a huge progression in terms of technology and forced many countries to either modernize or crumble. By the time the Versailles Treaty was created, modernization was not much of an issue, but taking away land, power, and money would make technological progression of any kind in Germany very difficult. Instead of addressing this issue in the modernization in the treaty nearly ignored the subject, and instead of helping modernization, it restricted the potential for modernization in Germany. The issue of alliances in Europe only increased by the Versailles Treaty. Instead of including all of Europe in the decision of alliances, the treaty merely strengthened the alliances held between a few of the countries and completely excluded other countries. The Versailles Treaty strengthened the distrust between many European countries and was very focused on the increase of power for other European countries, as it took many territories from Germany and spread them out to the allies of the Big Three. The Versailles Treaty failed to bring a balance of power throughout Europe in means of alliances, and instead tipped the scales in favor of its authors. The issue of nationalism was not directly mentioned in the Versailles Treaty, but the Big Three definitely showed extreme nationalism by attempting to bring Germany to its knees and spreading its land to their allies. The Versailles Treaty majorly failed to address this issue, and only strengthened their own feelings of nationalism and caused an injustice that raised nationalism of countries that were discriminated towards in the treaty. Similar to nationalism, competition was very poorly recognized in the Versailles Treaty, and because of the terms of the treaty, it caused competition in Europe to grow stronger and even more unbalanced. The taking of power from Germany caused a competition to get back on its feet and to find justice between Germany and the other European countries. Also, the main source of competition in this time period was the age of imperialism, and in taking the colonies away from Germany that they had created, Germany felt a huge injustice, which sparked a violent form of competition that was the partial cause for World War II. All information from Mrs. Birch. What should the treaty consist of to prevent further aggression between European powers? A change that should have been made was not entirely putting all the blame on Germany for starting the war. Due to the blame being put on the Germans, they all became very resentful and reconciliation was impossible at all. Another change that should have been implemented into the treaty were Wilson's 14 points. Also, the treaty should have included the principle of self-determination. In other words, the people affected should make the decisions democratically. This was most violated by detaching territories like Sudeland to Czechoslovakia, where most people are Germans. This was just another cause that was justifying World War II. In the treaty, the main alliances between Britain, France, Italy, and America engaged. Instead of only being concerned with the strengthening of this alliance, the treaty should have focused on creating alliances that balance power in Europe. The treaty should not exclude any countries. If the treaty included more countries, the rise in nationalism and competition would not have been as drastic, making less conflict and distrust between countries occur. The war greatly damaged countries who had beforehand refused to modernize. The war focused on the remaining countries to modernize to keep up with military weapons. Solutions to Versailles Treaty. The Versailles Treaty was originally supposed to bring peace to a war-ridden Europe and allow different countries to rebuild their government. But instead, the unfairness of the treaty brought Europe to war again. If the treaty had not put the blame on Germany for starting the war, Germany would not have to pay the reconciliation fees, which would mean that the German economy and infrastructure would be in better shape, allowing it to get back on its feet and start progression again. Having more money to pay off war debts and having the ability to maintain a more stable economy would have allowed Germany to modernize and change their government in a way that would be beneficial for growth. Instead of the communism and dictatorship that actually occurred. If Germany was not blamed in the treaty, the public that wanted revenge on Germany would not have their violent opinions supported by the Big Three, which would likely cause Germany to be on better terms with other countries of Europe and look better in the public eye. If the Versailles Treaty had not forced Germany to cut back on its military strength, and if it had not forced Germany to give up territories, the people of Germany would have felt much less resentful. This would make the amount of violent nationalism and competition decrease, and instead be replaced by a healthful and progressive version of nationalism and competition, creating more modernization. One of the most unlawful aspects of the Versailles Treaty was the fact that Germany had no say in any of the terms. If Germany was allowed to input their thoughts into the treaty, it would make the treaty more fair overall and would cause the conflicts between Germany and other European powers to decrease. If this conflict were lessened at this point, it is possible that World War II would either not have happened or would have happened in a drastically different way. The taking away of territory and money from Germany worsened their debts and suffering, which caused their famine to get even worse and increased negative feelings towards the Big Three countries from the German civilians. The negative feelings of the German civilians grew and grew as the odds were placed against them in the Versailles Treaty, and all of these feelings were part of the origins of the conflicts that caused World War II. If only the Versailles Treaty was more fair and inclusive, all European countries would have had time to stabilize their governments and economies and possibly move towards a future of peace. Because this was not the case, war devastated Europe again and caused the needless deaths of new generations. And as messy as this